Shalom, this is Yair Davidiy speaking to you from Jerusalem, the capital of Israel. Today we are continuing a discussion concerning the Cimmerians, or sometimes pronounced as Cimmerians. Cimmerians, they were a people who appeared in the Middle East shortly after the 10 tribes were exiled. There were 12 tribes of Israel. These 12 tribes of Israel had split into two different sections. The northern section comprised the kingdom of Israel, as distinct from the kingdom of Judah in the south. Present-day Jews are descended from former inhabitants of the kingdom of Judah, whereas the northern kingdom, in which were the majority of the Israelite tribes, was conquered by the Assyrians and taken away, taken into captivity, and disappeared, and they became the lost 10 tribes of Israel. And so, but we may trace where the lost 10 tribes were taken to before they disappeared. So some of the areas they were taken to were those that we otherwise know from the same sources to be as pertain to the collection of nations, a group of nations associated with Gomer. Gomer, the son of Japheth. Gomer had 3 sons, Ashkenaz, Riphat, and Togarmah. And where these nations are located, according to tradition, are also the same areas to which the 10 tribes were sent or resettled. And Gomer also appears in Assyrian inscriptions. The Assyrians encountered the people known as Gomer, or as we call them the Cimmerians after the Greek usage, and they were known to the Assyrians as Gemiri or Gomeru, and they were in these areas to which the Israelites had been taken. And we saw that there are a combination of circumstances, of circumstantial evidence, one could say, that indicates that the exiled Israelites, or at least a good portion of them, federated with the Cimmerians in their places of exile, with the Cimmerians in their offshoots. The offshoots of the Cimmerians included the Scythians. The Israelites, as if to say, joined up with them, became identified with them, merged with them, and moved with them to the west. We have proof of this, historical proof, and other proof, and also this corresponds with the first book of, the first chapter of the book of Hosea, in which the 10 tribes of Israel are described in their places of exile as to be identifiable with a loose woman known as Gomer. And this woman gives rise to children who will not be identifiable as Israelites, who have been divorced or disowned, as if to say, by the Almighty. Though in the end times they will reunite and be re-identified, identify themselves, or be reconciled to God Almighty, and come back. But in the meantime, they will have increased and multiplied to be a very large number of people, and to have been wealthy and powerful. And this corresponds to what we know about the lost 10 tribes from history and from other factors, and also from biblical prophecies. And so this is what we have, and this is the scenario as we understand it. The Cimmerians were in the Middle East, the Israelites linked up with them, and after the changes and different historical events and so on, the Cimmerians moved to the north and to the west, and then they moved westward into Europe. Now it may be that some of them also moved by sea, and or they moved by sea, according to different legends, through the Mediterranean and up along the western coast of Europe, or they may have moved overland at an earlier age than the others did, because shortly after the Cimmerians appearing in the Middle East, or shortly by historical standards, shortly meaning within 100, 200, 300 years later, we find groups or reports of the Cimmerians in Western Europe. And this corresponds with our identifying the inhabitants of the West. It is Scandinavia, the Netherlands, Belgium, France, Switzerland, and the British Isles, Ireland, Scotland, England, and offshoots of the British Isles, North America, Australia, New Zealand, all of these peoples as pertaining to the Lost in Tribes, in the sense that the Lost in Tribes are amongst them and were dominant amongst them historically and influence their national characteristics, and from out of them the Lost in Tribes will re-emerge. And maybe that they are a significant proportion of the population in those regions, amongst those peoples. We certainly think so. But whatever the case, the Lost in Tribes are definitely there amongst them, and that is where the Lost in Tribes are to be searched for. So historically it is interesting to note that there was an early appearance of Cimmerians, even in early times in Western regions. Homer is famous. Homer wrote the Ulysses and Odyssey, and he's a famous Greek poet. It's usually dated to 700-600 BCE, but actually they say it should be dated, or at least the works attributed to him should be dated much later, the 400s BCE, and with editing going on afterwards. At all events, in the Odyssey he places the Cimmerians as living along the Atlantic Ocean coast, that is Western Europe, some area in Western Europe. He describes it as a land of fog and darkness at the edge of the world, and the entrance to the underworld, to the place of the dead, and this has been understood as referring to Britain. So too we have another Greek known as Hecataeus of Abdera, 350 to 300 BCE. He mentioned the Cimmerian the city of Cimmerians among the Hyperboreans in the north of Europe. Hyperboreans is a general name for people living in the north of Europe, but it is often applied to Scandinavia or to the people in the British Isles, and it may be a form of the word Hyberi, or Iberi, which is what the Western Celts call themselves, and in Hebrew it means over or beyond. So to Hyperborean in Greek means beyond the north, so it has a similar connotation, and it also sounds similar. And this is what the Celts of the West did call themselves, Hyberi or Iberi. And so too we have, even now we call someone from Ireland is known as, in poetical terminology, is known as a Hibernian, from the same root of Iber, which in Hebrew, biblical Hebrew, meant Hebrew, because they referred to themselves by this name, and that is what they were. And we have another source known as Suda Orpheus. What does that mean, Suda Orpheus? That means writings attributed to Orpheus, but possibly written by someone else in the late 300s BCE. And he too placed the Cimmerians. He located the Cimmerians in the Atlantic Ocean area or along the North Sea coast of Europe, Western Europe. And he says the Cimmerians, they were dwelt without the splendid light of the sun and always in darkness. So this too indicates the north of Europe, the far north of Europe in winter time, when you lack sunlight during the winter. And he speaks of, therefore, the Cimmerians are being in that direction. And he also says that they are close to a tribe, the most just tribe of men, whom transport by a single ship alone suffices after death, for their souls to cross over the Arturian from the city by ship immediately. And in other words, they travel by, after they die, they travel by ship to the place of the death of the dead, which is not that far away. And according to Julius Caesar, this was, I believe, held in Gaul concerning the region of Britain. So this helps locate the Cimmerians in Western Europe, and along the northern coast of Europe, and also in the British Isles. It's worth noting that we have the Welsh. We have the people of Wales. They call themselves Gomri, and their language is called Gymriac. And this name Gomri, it is very similar to Gomer, and early Welsh writers also related themselves, trace their ancestors to Gomer, and they claimed that their early the language that they spoke was derived from Hebrew. Numerous Welsh scholars believed that their language was derived from Hebrew. Hundreds of works have been written on this, and recently this work, Carol Jongelin, he does an academic study of works on the subject comparing Hebrew and Welsh, and he has a bibliography listing hundreds, literally speaking, hundreds of works of scholarship showing the comparing to Welsh and Hebrew. And there definitely is something to be compared. There is valid comparisons that can be made both in the grammatical and syntactical structure of the Welsh language and also in the vocabulary. What applies to the Welsh also apparently applies to Irish, and there is some type of connection. At all events, the Welsh call themselves the name similar to Gomer. They call themselves Gomri, language Gymriac, and this name has been explained as derived from a root in Welsh meaning companion, associate. People call people of the same group their companions, a group of companions. Whatever the case, this may or may not be so. It does not necessarily contradict an association or deriving the name Gomri from Gomer, because it was a custom in ancient times. It was a common practice. We know have numerous examples of a known name being reinterpreted according to the language of the people who used it, even though the name itself may have had a different origin. So this too may be the case concerning Gomer and the Gomri of Wales. And also the Welsh have a tradition that one of the component elements who comprised the Welsh people were led by someone called Hugh Gadan from Bani, which was opposite Byzantium, to southwest Britain, which they called Davidiy, which is where we get the name Devon from. They called the region Davidiy. And so too we have a region in Anatolia where there's a port known as Defin, which is very similar to Davidiy. And this is close to Byzantium, where the Welsh said Hugh Gadan had led these people from when he took them over the seas to Wales and the surrounding regions. So this is proof, this is indications, this is according to the records, and we have additional proof from archaeology and from other sources showing that the peoples of Britain were derived, at least in part, from the Cimmerians, and so too they were of Israelite ancestry. They were descended from Israelites. May the God of Israel bless all of you. Thank you.